Greetings sailors and welcome to my second premium battleship preview of the week, because of course obviously we had the Scharnhorst earlier in the week. It's the Dunkerque, or as my brain keeps trying to tell me it's pronounced, the Dunkerque. Well done brain. So what this is a tier 6 premium battleship, and in some ways it's a baby Izumo because it's got all of its firepower on the front. It's got a pair of quad turrets facing forwards, a pair of super firing turrets. So unlike the Izumo, you don't have an awkward third turret, but that's it. That's all there is. And that alone basically dictates the entire playstyle of this thing, much as it does with the Izumo. But unlike the Izumo, this doesn't really have the armour to tank damage on the bow in the same way. It also doesn't have the AA or the secondary capability of the Izumo, even, adjusting for the difference in tiers. So overall, this is, I mean, it's a more nimble, agile ship, but it cannot take the damage in nearly the same way. And I think that is partly to do with the fact that it was basically designed to fight cruisers, specifically Italian and German cruisers. This thing was initially conceived of, or the class, because there were two of these built, they were initially conceived of to counter some of the Italian cruiser classes, but later on, once the German Kriegsmarine started building the Deutschland the Deutschland class heavy cruisers, the what was it, Panzerschiffe or whatever they were nicknames. This was sort of switched focus at that point. The designers switched focus to concentrate on those. So it really is a ship that's meant for fighting other cruisers, and that's kind of reflected in the fact that it's got the smallest main caliber of guns at tier 6. But that isn't really a handicap, I found. Now the first game we're going to see is basically the very first game I had in it, with top tier matchmaking. And when you're top tier, actually, having said it cannot tank the damage on the bow in the same way that the Izumo can, well, you can more at tier 6, and I was basically trying to play it in this first game like I would have played an Izumo in the same situation, and it was helped out by the fact that on this map I can limit the firing angles of, well, to some extent, of the ships firing at me. So anyway, what we're going to do is the usual thing. I'm going to run through the stats, and actually someone on the last video said, why do I put the stats on the screen over the gameplay? I used to just do kind of more traditional, like, here's the port section and I'm going to talk about the stats. You go and watch my Bismarck video, for instance, and you'll get that. But I decided at some point that, I mean, it was adding an extra 10-15 minutes to the video, and I could just as equally talk about the stats while there's some gameplay footage going on in the background. So that's what I decided to do. That's why I decided to do it that way. Anyway, hit points. We're going to start with hit points, as always. It's got 52,600, which is kind of on the low end at tier 6. It's actually a bit less than the Warspite has, and it's not dead last. I mean, it's, well, I can't say which is going to be dead last, actually. It's, well, actually, it kind of gives the game away. And yes, that is a kamikaze trying to mate with me there. That's, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, okay, it's the Bayern. The Bayern will have the least hit points. That kind of gives it away if I can't say which of the regular ones do. But this is still fairly low down the list. This is the next lowest amount of hit points at tier 6. So it doesn't have particularly a high amount of health to play around with. Torpedo Protection is equally rather weak. It's got a given value of 27%. You compare that to, say, the New Mex and the Arizona, which are both sort of just over and under 40% respectively. The Fuso's not known for its armour particularly. It's got 36% torpedo protection. The Warspite, however, is definitely worse at 22%. In terms of the actual rest of the armour, like I said, it's not well armoured. Not at all. It has a maximum belt armour value, I think it's the belt armour anyway, of 225. This is by far the weakest armour of any tier 6 battleship. So you have to be wary of all those machines around. Like the Warspite, for instance, with its 15-inch guns is going to be a problem. All of the 16-inch gun battleships that you can see, I almost said cruisers there, the 16-inch gun battleships that you can see at higher tiers will probably be able to just ignore the armour even when you're basically bow on towards them. So the armour isn't really something to be relied on at all. This is quite flimsy as battleships go. Now, I didn't find that I was just dying massively quickly, even so. I had a pretty good time playing the Dunkirk, just in terms of surviving, but I found I had to play smart. I couldn't play it exactly like I would play the Izumo, this is what I'm doing here. This is what I would do in an Izumo. I would use the range that I've got and keep my armour towards the enemy, and it's kind of working because I'm top tier, but it's mostly working because I'm not getting shot at. And if you do get shot at, and I found this in later battles, the armour just doesn't really count for much at all. So your mobility is a much greater asset than your armour. The guns are kind of a funny caliber. Like I mentioned, they are the lowest caliber guns that you get at tier 6. They're 13-inch guns, so it's smaller than the 14 inches of the New Mexico, the Arizona, and the Fuso. The Warspite's going to have 15-inch guns, and the Bayern, well, I'm not going to say, but I mean, you can look up, that's the thing with being under an embargo. It's like, oh, well, I can't really say what the caliber of the guns is, except you can just go and look it up on Wikipedia if you're really that interested. But anyway, yes, the smallest guns, 330mm guns. But I honestly didn't find it suffered so much for that. I mean, I've already racked up 50k damage in this game, as you can see. So, I don't think they're particularly gimped in terms of penetration values. It's not like the Scharnhorst at a tier higher with, the 11-inch smaller guns, where you would really struggle to fight against battleships, and therefore cruisers are the better choice. If you can get broadsides against battleships with these 13 inches, they will still be quite effective, even against tier 8 ships. So, yeah, it's a smaller caliber, but I found it mattered a bit less. So, the turret arrangement obviously is a 2x4, rather. I said 4x2. 4x2 is much more usual, but no, this is a 2x4. It's got 2 quad turrets, and there's actually an interesting little factoid about these turrets. They were basically split in 2, and the idea was that if a shell penetrated one half of the turret, the other half, provided the damage wasn't too great, if the turret traverse mechanism, if the barbette got damaged, that would be a problem for the entire turret. But let's say you had a hit on one side of the turret and it incapacitated that side of the turret, the other 2 guns could keep firing. Now this, of course, is not modelled in Warships at all. If you lose a turret, then you lose a turret. It did not happen often. I think it maybe happened once in the games I've been playing so far. This is obviously a massive annoyance with a ship like the Izumo, because losing one turret is completely crippling, because all your firepower is on the front. And it is equally going to be crippling if you lose a turret in this thing. You're just immediately going to lose 50% of your firepower. In fact, it's going to be worse than the Izumo, because the Izumo, you've still got that third turret, which you'll be able to angle around sometimes. This has no third turret. It's, that's it. 2 turrets. You lose one of them and that's it. But given that I really didn't get a lot of criticals, or even just outright having the turrets knocked out, I suspect the turrets themselves, because I don't think the armour value on the turrets is that great, but I think the turrets themselves have a lot of health, so that the chance of getting those critical knockouts is reduced. But that's just speculation on my part. I haven't, gone and searched for the data mined values to actually back that up. That's just gut feeling based on the number of battles I've played in and the how little it's happened. But it could just be pure RNG, because sometimes that happens. I mean, even after the global buff to turret health that happened a couple of patches ago, I have an example from only the other day in the Izumo. I had turrets that just got completely knocked out. Just twice in 4 games. It's completely RNG. And it wasn't even that they were criticaled and then penetrated and knocked out later on. It was just they were knocked out cleanly in one shot. And in the case of one of the games, it was from a salvo where I took literally no other damage. In fact, I didn't lose a single hit point, but one of my turrets got completely knocked out. And it's just the most incredibly irritating thing in the Izumo. And if it happens in the Dunkirk, it's going to be incredibly irritating as well. There's no way it won't be. It's just it's one of the few mechanisms that it needs to go, or it needs to be toned down, or there needs to be some kind of escalator involved, so that if you lose one turret, it makes it really harder to lose another turret. And instead what Wargaming did was the usual kind of, stopgap will just increase the turret health. I hope they make some more substantive change to that mechanic later on, because it's irritating beyond words when it happens. It really is. So that's enough about... I mean, that's just a pet bugbear of mine. I know it's a real... like, it's an annoyance to a lot of people. But, yeah, so you've got that. You've got the 2x4 turret arrangement. The reload is quick at 28 seconds, which puts it on a par with the Fuso. And the turret turn time is equally quick. In fact, it's got the best turret turn time at tier 6 with 36 seconds, which is... wow. I mean, the next best is, I think, the Fuso of the current ships. So it really does feel quite agile. Your turrets will keep up relatively well. And, of course, that's the same with the Scharnhorst. Smaller caliber, better turret traverse. Now, in this case, it doesn't have like a massively quicker reload than everyone else. 28 is, as I said, on a par with the Fuso, but it's still, like, it felt like you could get the shots out relatively quickly. The range is good, 18.2 kilometers, so you don't suffer for having the smaller caliber there. In fact, of course, that is second best at this tier. Only the Fuso beats it with the 21.8 kilometers. So you could, I think, take a spotter plane, but at least I think this gets a spot plane. I'd have to double check that. But I didn't really feel it was necessary. The base range of 18.2 on a tier 6 is very, very adequate indeed. And to go along with that, the dispersion feels alright. It doesn't feel massively super accurate. It doesn't feel massively super inaccurate. It just feels like it's somewhere in the middle. It feels reasonably average. Now, I think looking at something like the Arizona and possibly the New Mexico, I mean, they might have slightly more accurate guns, but it's one of these things where, because the ranges differ so wildly, you just look at the dispersion figure and it's a little hard to judge. And this was just based on gut feeling that the guns felt relatively accurate. But it might be... I mean, there's hidden figures when it comes to accuracy, because you've not only got horizontal, but you've got vertical accuracy as well. And differing figures can produce quite different results. So, yeah, overall it felt like I was hitting what I wanted to hit more often than not. But I don't think it is quite as accurate as the Arizona. The actual AP shells are... I mean, it's a smaller caliber, so they do less damage for the Citadels. It's 9,700, which is, of course, behind things like the Warspite with the... well, the Warspite is actually at the top. It's a poor example with the 15-inch guns. 11,400 for the Warspite. The 14-inch ones tend to do just over 10,000. So it's not that far behind the 14-inch guns, but it is a little bit lower. HE is likewise a bit on the lower side. 4,800 versus 5,000 on the Americans, 5,700 on the Fuso. So again, it's not that far behind. Fire chance, on the other hand, is actually better than pretty much everyone else. It's got 35% fire chance on those HE shells. So if you encounter, I don't know, let's say a bow on North Carolina, HE is a perfectly viable choice, I think. The other bonus with the shells is that they are actually fast for battleship shells, and this is possibly one of the reasons why I didn't feel like I struggled that much with the dispersion. The initial starting AP velocity is 870 meters a second, and the HE is actually faster at 885. Now, of course, faster shell velocity means you need less lead time, and it means the enemy has less time to maneuver out of the way. So you compare that to the much slower shell velocities of, say, the Fuso and the Arizona. The New Mexico is a little bit faster. In fact, I think the Warspite is by far the slowest. 732, yeah, it is. So you compare 870 to 732. You just need to give so much less lead, and it makes hitting cruisers easier in particular, but also battleships that might have a chance to dodge out the way with your slower Warspite shells. And that is going to make it easier to hit things. So overall, the combination of the stats with the guns, even though they're smaller caliber, makes them pretty nice. It's just that double forward turret arrangement that a lot of people might find awkward. Like what I'm doing right now, this manoeuvring right here, I can't fire at anything at the moment. And the fact that the turrets get round relatively quickly is good, but it's still, you know, over 30 seconds, even with the expert marksman captain skill. So you have to plan your manoeuvres around on the water quite carefully. But when you can get the guns pointed where you want them to, they do behave reasonably well, and you can do quite good damage with them. Which, of course, this being a premium ship does matter, because damage equals credits. Although, well, not strictly. It's percentage of damage done, and you know, the targets that you hit that equal credits and XP. But you still have to hit, and you still have to be able to do the damage to get this thing to produce the credits that you want it to. So the main batteries are really good, and then we get to the secondary batteries and the anti-aircraft, and this is one of those areas where it's considerably weaker than its contemporaries. Now, in terms of its secondaries, it's got those turrets out the back, and it's actually got a couple of side turrets as well. It has 2 double 130mm turrets and 3 quad 130mm turrets, and that's it. Those are the only secondaries it's got. So they look cool, and they've got a 5-kilometer range, and they are actually dual-purpose secondaries. I think this was one of the first battleships in the world to be built with dual-purpose secondaries, if I'm not completely misremembering my facts. But because you have so few of them, I mean, I think they are all HE throwing ones, which is useful against, say, destroyers. But because you've got 3 of them pointed backwards, and you've only got 2 at the sides, I mean, where they are placed is a bit awkward. And because you've got so few of them, it's not really a strong secondary suite at all. You compare it to other ships like the 1,827mm that the New Mexico and the Arizona gets, and even the Fuso's got a pretty good secondary suite. And the Warspite, you know, this is by far and away the weakest group of secondaries that you get on any Tier 6 battleship. So that's going to be maybe a problem if you get a destroyer that's coming up close, because of course secondaries are not particularly accurate. That's just the nature of secondaries in this game. And there's also bad news when it comes to their AA. You have, again, by far the weakest at Tier 6. Now, it's not that far behind the Arizona. In fact, the Arizona actually has a worse given AA rating, and that's because it's got comparatively short-ranged AA. It's got 3.1 and 4.2 kilometer secondaries with 115 DPS. This has got those 130mm plus some smaller caliber AA guns with a combined DPS of 106. So yeah, and most of the smaller guns, I mean, there's a bunch of, what was it, like 12.7s, basically like machine guns with 1.2 kilometer range. There are some, I think, is it 20mm or 40mm, something like that. Probably 20mm actually, with 3 kilometer range, and then you've got the 130mm secondaries with 5.2 kilometer range. It's not going to be enough to really discourage carriers to come for you. I mean, it's not great at all. So I definitely recommend having the fighter plane on this, which will help a bit. But it makes life a little harder when carriers decide to come for you, because unlike the New Mexico, you're not going to be able to do that much about it. And even compared to the other, like the Warspite, for instance, doesn't have particularly good AA, or the Arizona, but I think this is probably the worst overall. So, yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of its firepower. It's good primary armament, but the secondary and AA suite is distinctly more lackluster. And you could take captain skills to try and improve that, of course. I think you'd probably be better off with an AA captain than you would with a secondaries captain. But in terms of your actual modules, I would stick with things that help your main battery and, you know, decrease dispersion, things like that. Lastly, maneuverability. It's got 29.5 knots ordinarily, which is pretty good. It's the fastest of the Tier 6s. So I suppose that's the compensation for the fact that you don't get a lot of armour. But like I said at the start, this thing was meant for fighting cruisers primarily, so it's almost got the speed to catch up to, or keep up with a lot of cruisers. And that actually is quite useful, and you're going to see it a lot in this one, where I'm dodging a lot of torpedoes when trying to press forwards. And this was actually a tier 7 game, but there wasn't a lot of battleships on each side, so I was trying to be fairly aggressive because I could see the team wasn't doing so well. The turn radius is 730 meters, and that's a little on the wide side. The Fuso is slightly worse at 740. All the other tier 6s, they're generally slower, but they have much tighter turning radiuses. So yeah, the turn radius is a little, you know, but it's still okay. It's not excessively big. It didn't feel like that was particularly crippling. I was still able to, in this kind of situation, when I know there's a destroyer ahead of me making drops, I was still able to quite easily dodge. Although in this case, with this particular destroyer captain, they weren't making particularly smart drops, so that made my life a bit easier. The rudder shift is also pretty average, actually. It's dead on 14 seconds, and I think I used the rudder shift module on this, which I tend to do on most of my battleships these days, which got it down to, what was that, 12 point something seconds. So that was useful. It's I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, the New Mexico's better, but only by about a half a second, and everything else is slightly worse. I mean, the Warspite's 14.2, Fuso's 14.9, Arizona's 14.6. So yeah, 14, dead on 14, pretty average. Feels okay. So it moves around pretty well, and the main reason it feels like it moves around pretty well is that speed, which does come in useful. It means you're going to be able to, when you're top tier anyway, you're going to be able to outpace every battleship that you meet, and you're still going to be able to keep your distance from cruisers if you absolutely have to. Very last thing, camo, and at the surface detection of, well, a base surface detection of 16.9, and of course with a premium camo that goes down to 16.4. It's not good. Only the Fuso is worse with 18.9, and everybody else is kind of 14.5 kilometers or under. So, despite the fact that it's not really the biggest ship, it's also not really the, you know, it's not got a massively tall mast. It's still fairly visible, and they'll see the Fusos coming first, but they'll see you coming right afterwards. Whereas, say, the New Mexico with all of the captain skills can get down to 11.8, so this can at best get down to 14. So it's quite the gap. But I didn't feel like that was a major hindrance. It's just, you know, it's a thing to be aware of. It's not going to be a particularly stealthy ship. So that's all the stats disposed of. I mean, even with everything I've said, it still comes back to this turret arrangement. That is the defining feature of this ship. All the other things, my voice is going a bit there. All the other things like the speed and, you know, the secondaries and the AA and the shell values, and they're all kind of sit slightly behind that in terms of its importance. And that is going to be, I think, the primary factor you have to consider when you're thinking if you want to buy this thing. Because sometimes, like this kind of situation here, where I'm able to press on a group of enemies and I'm able to press forward, it's been pretty strong. And I'm, again, able to keep bow on towards them as I was in the previous battle, and I'm still taking the hits, but it's mitigating some of the damage. Although it's a bit awkward given the relative angles here, and it's just the kind of the fact that they're not managing to land the hits on me particularly well that is really saving me. So I've racked up almost 130k damage already, but the problem is we are losing badly. And there we go, 5th kill. Would have been a Kraken Unleashed, except this being a... Oh, there we go, my turret got a critical there. So yeah, this is actually one of the few games where I did get a turret critical. The fact that the rest of the team's doing really badly is, you know, not helping, but I feel like I felt at the time like I was, you know, doing my utmost here. I was absolutely doing my best to try and pull this back. So yeah, but yeah, what was I going to say? It was going to be it should have been a critical Kraken. Wow, brain. It should have been a Kraken, but because these are preview ships, I did not get it. In fact, they actually, they briefly took away the Scharnhorst and gave them us back, and at that point they said, right, it behaves like a, as far as the stats are concerned, it behaves like a proper ship now, and you can get awards and things for it, but they haven't done that with the Dunkirk. So, nearly 150k damage now, and this New York driver was being a little bit lewd. Just a little bit, but given the situation we're in here, yes. Now, even though he's angled against me, I'm actually more going for... I mean, some of these shots are going to his hull, but I'm also going for superstructure. And you can see the awkward secondaries arrangement means that I've literally got one secondary gun that's firing at this guy. Although it was scoring some hits, but this is pretty close range. But even though I've killed all of these ships, I've done all of this damage, we're still down on points, and we've got our Nagato, who is very, very close to a Kiev, and the Kiev is a dangerous ship. And I could just immediately start plunging back towards, but we need a cap point. We need to cap. And there's also a cruiser that's left alive as well, but he's actually way behind me. And I'm going to give you a little spoiler for this and say that that cruiser did not have a particularly good score. So he basically tailed behind me for the latter part of the battle and didn't really contribute that much. If he'd gone back much earlier towards the, what is that, the A point, the C point? Can't really tell on the preview screen that well. Possibly this might have been a different story, but yeah, there just isn't the time. The enemy have too many cap points. And this is one of those games where I absolutely did my utmost and had an absolutely kick-ass game, but the rest of the team just was not pulling their weight sufficiently. Even though I was really, you know, kicking butt and taking names, it still wasn't enough. Some games are just unwinnable, unfortunately. So we slightly slowed the... I've kind of given the ending away there, haven't I? But I think you could probably look at the scores and guess that there's just not enough time to get back to the cap circle. Like, the cruiser is only now turning around to go back to the cap circle. And he's only got a couple of extra knots on me. And that Nagato, meanwhile, is in serious trouble. So, yeah. If the cruiser had turned around earlier, we might maybe have salvaged this. But, like I said, they really didn't do a lot in this game. So, this was by far the best result I had in the Dunkirk, and it's just a pity it was going to be a loss, and almost inevitably a loss, even though I really tried my hardest to prevent it. But I think it also shows off really well what the Dunkirk can do. I almost used another game as well, where it was a tier 8 game, didn't do nearly so well damage or score-wise, but it still showed that even in tier 8, the Dunkirk could hold its own, provided that you positioned yourself well. And that's really key. You have to position yourself well. You have to try and be aware of what the enemy team's doing and not just get caught with your trousers down. Because if you have to turn and run away, like with the Izumo, that leaves you really vulnerable. So, 1900 damage. I had the second best score of either team. And yes, I capped, but I only capped once. So one lot of capping XP, and the rest was just purely from doing damage and getting kills. Second best score on either team. And it was on a loss. So I know I did well. It's just a pity about the rest of my team, really. So you can see there, the main battery accuracy was actually pretty reasonable. Like I said, I think it's the shell speed that really makes this feel like it's got relatively accurate guns rather than the actual dispersion value. 500,000 credits on that game, so that wasn't too shabby at all. And generally speaking, I was pretty pleased with that performance, even though it was just one of those games where it's incredibly disappointing that it's a loss, but it's still, you know that you did well. So, is this going to be worth your money? Well, I think it's a good ship. I think, however, if you're looking at a really good all-rounder, or you're looking for a really good all-rounder at tier 6, get the Arizona. Now, obviously, there's the Warspite as well, which is a little more specialised. It's got bigger guns, but it's not particularly well armoured, or at least it doesn't feel like it is. I think it's been a bit improved in the most, was it 0.5.9? I think they improved it. Not sure. Anyway, in theory, the Warspite's got slightly better armour these days, but still, overall, the Arizona is the best kind of noob-friendly, here is a battleship that you play like a battleship. And the Warspite has some of that, but the Warspite just feels a bit more fragile. The Dunkerque is definitely fragile, and the guns are really powerful, but that arrangement of turrets is going to turn some people off completely. It is, on occasion, really powerful with that arrangement where you can push against enemies and just punish them with the rate of fire and the relative accuracy. But there are other times, like if you're ever in a situation where you find that you're outnumbered on a flank and you have to turn and run away, and then suddenly it's completely impotent, it really sucks. So there's not a lot of middle ground with this ship. It really depends on the situation you find yourself in, whether you're going to do well or whether you're going to do terribly. And that's exactly the same with Izumo. So when I said at the start it's a baby Izumo, it's, yes, the same holds true for the Izumo, the same holds true for this, the same will hold true for the Nelson class battleships of the Royal Navy, you know, whichever point we get the Royal Navy in the game. So there you go. Overall, the Arizona, but the Dunkerque's pretty good as well. So if you found this useful, and I hope you have, you can leave in the comments below, you can hit the like button, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.